These are things that we all have to wake up to because we are losing ourself. And when you lose the world, and you lose culture, and you lose society, and you lose tribe, and you lose family, you can't survive. You got nothing. Hello everybody, welcome back to CHEK Live, my amazing YouTube channel where I have hundreds of videos for you for free. Today my topic is the danger of losing yourself. And right at this time in our history, the history of man, we are losing ourself, which I will explain. I will explain the dangers of that. And my dream is that when you understand what the self is, that it helps you think much more clearly, pay much more attention to where you're putting your money, and to be much more critical in your thinking about what's being offered to you, including technologies, medical interventions, and a lot of the things going on hot and heavy in the world right now. So to begin with, let's look at the difference between self with a small s and self with a capital S. You see, I have the danger of losing your capital S-E-L-F. Self with a small s, in summary, means you. If I was to get into the depth of the metaphysics of it, it would be more than I can pack into a short, comprehensible presentation. But the self with a capital S is a term used by a number of people over the years, particularly Carl Jung used the term self a lot. Steiner, many others have used that term for the same reasons. But the self is all that supports you in being you. So self is you. Capital self is all that supports you in being you. So some of the things that support us in being us is, first, we all have to come into the world with a mother and a father. And once we're there, even if we're the first child, that means they have a family. So our family is the people that we typically turn to for support if we're going through a health crisis, a financial crisis, for comfort, for reassurance, the kinds of things that a family should give us, but unfortunately in many instances, as a lot of you know, we don't always get that from the family. So we have to look into our tribe. Here, tribe means the people that we would think of as extended family, people that we can trust, rely on, and get the kind of support from that we often rely on a family on, and that we often have even when we do have a family, because human beings are social creatures and we learn from each other. We grow because of each other, and we learn more about who we are because we're in relationships with other people, and we learn what our skills are or what our natural talents and abilities are. But if you were the only person there was, you would not evolve much at all, because there would be nobody to bring things out of you. Next is society, and we don't need society if we have tribe, but to grow in the understanding of bigger relationships, such as how a city works, or how systems work, or how large numbers of people that are beyond tribe interact with each other. We need to have things like law. We have to have a more comprehensive medical system. We have to have transport systems. We have to have energy supply systems and more comprehensive food supply systems. So when we go from tribe to society, we now get into industry and technology. And culture, of course, is the milieu that groups of people come from. So we have, when people from the United States come from an American culture or a North American culture, people that come from India come from a very different culture. So when you travel to different cultures, there's things that are clearly different. Sometimes we're excited because there's things that we don't normally get in our culture, but sometimes we're frustrated. For example, if we go to England, we're in a British culture and they drive on the opposite side of the road, their luggage trolleys are shit at the airport. So there's things that are very similar to our American culture if you're an American, but there's things that are different, and there's different foods, and there's sometimes there's different music, and for example, the British are great musicians and singers. They have a lot of amazing bands, as we all know, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and many others. And so you get a bigger melting pot in culture, and it allows each of the things that we describe as society, tribe, and family and self to grow even more efficiently in many ways, because we have more opportunities and more technologies and more people, so more minds to work with. Yet all of these things here actually depend on the earth. And so when you say, well, what do all these people need to survive, whether it be the individual self, the family, the tribe, society, or culture, it turns out that all of those have a self as well, which is the earth itself. So when we look at what it is that really makes us up, well, we have to have earth. Earth gives us embodiment. And so these elements come from alchemy, and obviously we know what they are, but they're used in alchemy, and many people get confused or take an academic approach to alchemy and deny it because they don't really understand it very deeply. So just like we have a rainbow, which is red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, which is a stepping up from red to violet of higher frequencies of light, and the chakra system is tuned to those same frequencies. The alchemists saw that everything in nature was some kind of expression of a frequency range. So the lowest frequency range would be earth, then water, then fire, then air, all of which manifest in space. If you go beyond earth, water, fire, and air, beyond fire, you can get to plasma. Plasma is dispersed throughout space. If you haven't studied the electric universe, just search the electric universe on your search engine and you'll find a lot of cutting-edge, fascinating research showing you plasma dynamics and electrodynamics and how the universe is really an electric being, including us and the earth. There's a lot of phenomenal experts there. So what the alchemists did, where you have a 7 chakra system in the Hindu system of how the body works, or you have different frequencies in science, such as radio waves, microwaves, X-rays, gamma rays. You can take the spectrum of vibration and break it up into different frequency bands. We have a range of visible frequency, a range of audible frequency. The alchemists that didn't have the kind of advanced technology that we have today with instrumentation saw that everything in the earth was either solid, liquid, being moved by fire, or gas. So to the alchemist, anything that was solid and could not be reduced to a liquid, for example, if you had something that couldn't be reduced to a liquid, be in the earth element by itself. But if you take metal if you heat stones, you can smelt the metal out of them, and when they're in that liquid state, the alchemists would say that they had shifted states to water. If you take water and heat it up enough, it becomes air, but you have to have fire to do it. Fire is a transformative agent. And then it becomes atmosphere. So there you see a liquid turning into a gas. Or if you take water and freeze it, it becomes solid. Therefore, it is classified in the earth element. And then if you warm it, it becomes water. And then if you warm it up enough, it becomes a gas. And if you took it to the next level, it might reach the plasma state. So the alchemists saw that everything in us and around us was within these bands of frequency, and when you heat something up, it starts vibrating faster and faster. So the alchemists weren't really just saying that earth, water, fire, and air are just those elements. They were saying that these are frequency ranges within which the things that happen inside of us and around us occur. So that's an important concept to hold on to. But when you look at what is it that we have to sustain ourselves as an individual, a family, a tribe, a society, or a culture, what you find out is that we have to have earth. If you didn't have earth, you'd have nowhere for plants to grow, for animals to live. There would be no food. You'd have no home. You couldn't live here without earth. Earth also symbolizes home or containment in alchemy. It's actually represented in alchemy as a square. There's another symbol for it as well, but one of the symbols for the earth element is a square, a container. So if we need the earth to grow food and to have a place, then we obviously have to be very concerned about any so-called science that promotes the use of things that destroy the earth, such as pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, strip mining, fracking, excessive oil drilling, and using the earth as a place for dumping dangerous toxic chemicals and things that most of you are aware of that are going on all the time. Now, to keep this short, I'm not going to go into a lot of dialogue on the many, many things that we have done that are literally destroying the earth, but there's plenty out there on those topics. So the first thing we need is earth, because without it, we don't have a body. We cannot make a body without the earth to underpin biological life. No earth, no biological life. No earth, no body. We have to have water. Well, research shows that almost every major ocean and waterway in the world is polluted to dangerously high levels. We now have many, many problems with young men not reaching puberty till way late and becoming feminized due to all the high levels of estrogens in our food supply, and a lot of the chemicals that are used in farming are estrogenic. In fact, there's 3 primary classes of pesticides. One class is neurogenic. They're made from the pesticides used in biological warfare that attack the nervous system. The other ones are estrogenic, and those are pesticides that elevate the estrogens in the insect's body so high it disrupts their reproductive cycle. And the third class is glyphosate, which kills the microbiome and kills bacteria and microlife wherever you spray it, also called Roundup. And they're being sued quite regularly now and winning. People are winning lawsuits. In fact, a friend of mine, Dave Murphy, founder of Food Democracy Now!, his organization was the first organization to actually win a lawsuit against Monsanto. And all their cover-ups have now been exposed. Then you look into the effects of NPK fertilizer, which actually comes from the Second World War and the military-industrial complex trying to figure out how to keep profits going in, and they found that they could turn the elements that you use to make explosives into NPK fertilizer, and then spent countless millions of dollars convincing farmers all over the world that they needed it. But now what we found is that it's not breaking down in the soil, and there is billions of tons of NPK fertilizers that have sunk down through rainfall into the rocks. And experts say if we had a period where there was enough rainfall that the NPK fertilizers trapped in the deep soil and rocks would leach into the ocean and kill the entire ocean. And all of this comes in the name of science. So we have to be very, very careful with science, as I will point out later in this presentation. Now, I could give you a long, long list of all the ways that we have used so-called science to destroy the earth. And there have been many books written about this, and I have many of them in my library. And Rachel Carlson's book, Silent Spring, which I think came out, if I remember right, in the late 60s or in that time period, warned that we were destroying the planet with all the use of dangerous chemicals and related technologies. Well, now it's almost impossible to find water anywhere on this planet that does not have dangerous toxins such as farming and industrial chemicals in it. I was recently talking to an expert that highlighted that today, actually I think it was Eugene Trufkin, I was listening to him on a podcast, and he said today the average child is born with something like 126 to 200 different dangerous chemicals in their body when they test their blood right when they come out of the womb. So we're in big trouble in the name of science, because every one of these things was validated by so-called science. So what I'm pointing out is that because the self, with a capital S, supports culture, society, tribe, family, and an individual, anything that we do to damage our connection to family, tribe, society, or the earth has the effect of isolating us. If you lose connection to your family, it's very stressful and it can lead to a psychological crisis. If you lose connection to family and you have no tribe, you're still in trouble. In fact, if you have no family and no tribe, then society is a scary and potentially dangerous place to be, and so is culture. So if you can think of these are like outgrowths of each other. What was family became tribe, tribe became society, society becomes culture. So these are like phases of maturation, like child, adolescent, adult, and mature person. Or sometimes crazy people, as I'm describing. So to continue without more discussion of what we're doing to the earth, because I could go on for hours, we also have this issue of water. China has so many waterways that are so poisoned that nothing lives in them. I've gotten many reports in my library of fish not being able to reproduce, of farming chemicals that they use as pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and rodenticides getting into waterways, causing birth deformations, a disruption of the endocrine system, inability to reproduce, and a lot of really, well, things that indicate that we're killing the biological life on the planet and nature's ability to support us. Water is also extremely important because it conducts subtle energies at an extremely wide range of frequencies. So water is like an essential part of our body because it picks up so many frequencies, and even psychic energy. If you look at the book Blueprint for Immortality by Harold Saxon Burr in 1947 at Yale University, he did a very interesting experiment. He took seedlings of the same genus and broke them into two groups. And because he had a theory that water had the ability to carry psychic energy, he did a test where he had his university students take a mason jar, like a quart jar made of glass, with water in it, and he had them hold on to the water for approximately 3 hours. And then after holding the water for 3 hours, he put all that water from his students in a location which they used to water the plants. And then he had mason jars of water taken to psych wards where people were locked up for being, psychologically ill or insane, and he got them to interact with the water for 3 to 4 hours, and he watered the second group of plants with the water that was interacted with by psychically ill people. And he shows pictures in the book of the difference in the way the plants grew, and it's quite mind-boggling. The plants that were watered with the water that was interacted with by psychically ill people looked gnarled, crooked, deformed, and often did not grow toward the sun. And the water that was from the students produced plants that were completely normal. There was no indication. The only difference was who interacted with the water. Then you got Masaru Emoto's research showing how even writing words on a mason jar or a glass jar container of water affects the crystals of water as it forms in a freezer like a snowflake. And some of you that haven't seen that should just look up Masaru Emoto and look at his work on the internet, and the images are quite mind-blowing. But he's showing you that even words near water have a profound effect on how the snow crystals or snowflakes shape and form. And when you put words like "I hate you" or use swear words or anything derogatory or negative that would harm an individual's sense of self or connection, that the water looks very, very distorted. And some of the pictures are quite shocking. So remember, our bodies, when we're born, are about 70% water. We're largely water, and water is essential for the transport of nutrients in the body, the transport of energy. You don't have blood without water. Your fascia is largely water. It's about 95% water. So when you look at the importance of water for interfacing with different vibrational levels, whether it be, shall we say, the vibration of the sun, or the interaction with elements of the earth, such as the other elements, or feeling people's emotions, or intuiting what's going on in your life or in a given situation, water turns out to be the interface. In fact, if you study Greg Braden's series, Missing Links, he shows research where they've found that the world's most powerful computer used to be the Cray supercomputer. The hard drive is made of water. Researchers looking into water found that water has a capacity to remember every surface it's ever touched for the life of the water molecule, which can be extremely long. And researchers looking into the most advanced computers in the world, which also use water in the hard drives, were confused as to how in the world water could store that much energy, because even our most advanced computer technologies don't even come close to that. So scientists looked into it, and Greg Braden showed that the results of their research was quite phenomenal. They showed that the water is not actually storing the information. The water is the interface with a non-local field that holds the information or the memory of whatever's put into the water. So the reason they're able to store massive amounts of information on these supercomputers in a small amount of water is because the water is the medium. It's the interface with subtle energy fields or non-local fields of information, which would relate to what we classically call mind. So we have huge problems with water. We have water shortages in many places of the world. We have about a billion and a half to 2 billion of people that don't have access to clean drinking water. Only 1% of the water on the earth is drinkable by human beings. And we have almost no places in the world left where we don't have nuclear fallout, industrial chemicals, commercial farming chemicals, and dangerous chemicals getting into the water of our body. Therefore, water is essential to the self because we all need it to survive. All biological life needs water. and we're destroying the waterways and the water itself on the planet, which means we're losing connection to the self that individuals, family, tribes, societies, and cultures depend on. Next, we have fire. In our body, fire relates to metabolism. Your solar plexus, solar means sun, your sun plexus is a very large collection of neurons that is as big as your spinal cord and brainstem in neuron count. It's sometimes called the second brain or the abdominal brain. And why that's important is because we don't actually have an internal mechanism for turning sunlight into food through photosynthesis. So it turns out that plants are an external organ of digestion, which I learned this concept from Ibrahim Karim, an amazing scientist. I have an excellent podcast with him. He's the founder of biogeometry. He's an architect, a scientist, and one of the deepest people I've ever met as far as his spiritual depth. But he pointed out to me that plants are an external organ that turn light into food because we can't do it. And the solar plexus is the nerve plexus that runs almost your entire digestive and eliminative system, with the exception of the lower segment of your colon, which is run by the inferior mesenteric plexus, if I remember right. It's been a long time since I thought about that one. So what that is important, why that's important is because the plants are actually an external form of an organ that we need to live. And if you poison the earth and you poison the water, and as Harold Saxon Burr, a Yale professor, showed in 1947, you can actually poison water with negative thought and chaotic emotional, mental disturbance in human beings. So it's much more sensitive than people have really realized, even though that research has been around for a long time. Fire also relates to the sun. So I don't think I need to really point out that the sun is a massive ball of fire that's something like 93 million miles from here, but can make a very hot day that far away. And it's so bright that if you look at it, other than the first hour of morning or the last hour of sunlight, it'll damage your eyes. And what would life be without the sun? But we're also clear-cutting massive amounts of forest, where there's something like, I don't remember the statistic exactly, something like 1 million hectares of trees being cut down in the rainforest, which people like Rudolf Steiner said are the lungs of our planet. In fact, Steiner said all the way back in the late 1800s, human life depends on two things: bees and trees. And if they reach a critically low level, life on Earth will cease to exist as we know it. And we now have a massive problem with bees dying out, becoming extinct, that's been tracked back to pesticide use. Electromagnetic pollution are two of the key sources that are killing the bees off. And you might want to think about that with all this 5G, and now they're talking about 6G, because those frequencies insects are very sensitive to, and many other creatures are very sensitive to, and they can completely disrupt nature because those frequencies are not congruent with biological life. That's a real issue, and there's plenty of people looking into researching that. So we have the metabolic function in our bodies. If our bodies are not balanced and healthy, and we're eating toxic food and drinking poisoned water, it causes global inflammatory response. And then if we're using food that has Roundup on it, which is glyphosate, it kills our microbiome, which is loaded with massive volumes of genes, produces huge amounts of nutrition and hormones inside of us, such as serotonin. And it's just like, this is like one of the most important 4 pounds of dirt you can possibly imagine, and glyphosate wipes it out. So if you're eating any kind of commercially raised food or GMO food or Bill Gates food, you are setting yourself up for a lot of problem. And what do we have? Today we have a huge diagnosis that's running rampant called metabolic syndrome, which is what happens when your body's metabolism is disrupted. Your body gets inflamed and overheated, and you get a lot of obese, swollen, overheated, sick people. And all you got to do is look at the rates of obesity and the frequency of the diagnosis metabolic syndrome, and you can see once again we're destroying the self with a capital S. Now, we also have issues of global warming, because when you cut the foliage down, you don't have anything to keep the Earth's temperature regulated. You lose a lot of water into the atmosphere too fast. When you cut the rainforest down, you're not only taking away massive amounts of plants and biodiversity, you're taking away something that, again, keeps the Earth's temperature effectively regulated. And many refer to the Amazon and the rainforest as Earth's medicine chest, which we're destroying mostly for corporate crops to make junk food and things like inexpensive clothing and stuff that is unnecessary because we have technologies that have been suppressed. For example, hemp was suppressed by the logging industry and other industries, but hemp could replace many of the things that are damaging the earth due to how they're produced on the planet. So we have, once again, a corporate disease going on. Then we have air. We have the same problems with air. The hydrological cycle involves the air. Whatever chemicals you put in the water get in the air. Whatever you put in the earth gets in the water, gets in the air. Whatever you do with large industries that are producing smokestacks, that are incinerating and burning things such as refineries, you put into the air. We not only have very toxic air, there's some places, I remember I was in Arizona, Scottsdale, Arizona, a number of years ago, and I went out for a run, and the air was so polluted, it literally made me feel sick. My eyes were burning. Los Angeles is cleaner than it used to be. You used to be able to drive into Los Angeles from San Diego and see a blanket of smog over the city. Mexico City is famous for poor air quality, but scientists have also identified that the saturation of oxygen in the air is dropping, and it's getting low enough that elderly people may start dying in certain cities because they can't get enough oxygen into their body. And this is why when people have certain illnesses or traumas or diseases, you see them getting an oxygen mask to help keep them alive. People need oxygen, and if there's not enough of it, we're in trouble. So we've very scientifically destroyed the earth, destroyed the water, destroyed the biological terrain that protects the sun from the earth from overexposure to heat and sun, and ultimately leads to drying the earth out. And we have very effectively poisoned the air. And when you start getting an earth that gets too hot, it has to try to cool itself. So just think of what happens to you when you get an illness like the flu. You go through periods of being very cold and shivering to being in a fever and sweating and overheating. So we're pushing the Earth's immune system into a crisis, and one of the side effects of that is huge storms, monsoons, tornadoes, and also earthquakes. So I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist to see, if you just look at what's going on. If you study James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis, he really was a scientist with other scientists that produce multiple books showing how the Earth is not just a bunch of matter. It's a living, breathing organism, and most politicians and corporations completely and utterly ignore that and use science that is bought and paid for to get you to buy into dangerous technologies and use them without realizing you're destroying yourself. So we are made of the earth. We are made of water. We have to have metabolism to stay warm or we'll die, and we have to breathe air. The average person breathes 25,900 breaths a day, which interestingly, as Steiner pointed out, and some of the Hindu sages pointed out, as far as 3,000 years ago. 25,900 is a very interesting number because that's how long it takes for the Earth's 23-degree axis to make one rotation called the precession of the equinox. And that's what the Mayan long count calendar is based on, a 25,900 year cycle. So what I'm telling you that for is because everything in us is a microcosm of a macrocosm in the universe. And many sages, from Buddhist sages to Hindu sages, I've got many, many books and diagrams and posters from my studies all over the different cultures. We all knew that human beings were a microcosm of the macrocosm. So what I'm pointing that out for is to say, whatever you do to this planet, you do to yourself. I call that the echo effect. ECHO, energy, chemistry, hydration, and organisms. If we disrupt the flow of energy on this planet, it affects us. If we disrupt the chemistry on the planet, it affects us and all living beings. Hydration, if we disrupt the hydrological cycle and our ability to hydrate ourselves, or for life to hydrate itself, we cause big problems. And if the organisms that we're eating are poisoned by our scientific advances and we eat them, well, you don't need to be a genius. If you eat sick animals, you create sick people. Well, look at the rates of disease. 1 in 2 people today will get cancer in their lifetime. We have many countries with over 60% of people that are obese. We have chronic diseases through the roof, heart disease and many other diseases, from autism to neurological disorders to Parkinson's, and the list is very long. And it's also very interesting to me that we have the most expensive medical system in the world, in the United States of America, but we're ranked 37th worldwide for quality of medical service. That is a pathology. Where is our esprit de corps? Where is our quality of workmanship? Where is the honesty and the morality of science in that? Where is the business acumen in that? It's ridiculous, but we keep putting money into it. I could talk for hours on that one. This is why the medical system is often referred to by many experts as the Medical Mafia, and I have several books on it. If you get in a car accident, a hospital's a fine place to be. But if you're not taking care of yourself and you're not taking care of the planet, you're going into a system that is designed not to get you healthy. It's a disease maintenance system, not a healthcare system. And it mirrors back how science and technology, which is promoted as some great savior, and there have been great advances that have been very helpful. We love our cars, we love our airplanes, but there's a certain point at which we have to say, what's the impact of that technology and how is it helping us with regard to making life efficiency more efficient versus being destructive to the self, to the environment, to the planet, and to each other. People are so after money that they shut off half of their brain and don't look at the ramifications of these technologies. Every drug that has ever been taken off the market was first scientifically validated. You should look very carefully at what the medical system and the governments are trying to encourage you to do now. And look at the standards of research that are supposed to be used for any of these types of medical procedures and what's actually happening. Look very carefully at what Bill Gates is trying to convince you of. And look at Vandana Shiva's book, Oneness versus the 1%, to see what he has done in Africa and India and what he is trying to do here and everywhere in the world simultaneously, such as genetically modified crops and trying to get rid of cattle farming and meat to force everybody to have to buy fake meat from his organizations that he's heavily invested in. You're talking about an extremely dangerous situation, and the gullibility of people is shocking to me. Absolutely shocking how lazy people are and uneducated people are, and they're not looking into this, but they're all running to doctors and therapists, crying their eyes out because they're riddled with cancer, obese, feeling like shit all the time. But don't do the work to think constructively. Very dangerous. Now, I will finish the discussion by sharing what are called structure stages of consciousness. This has been well researched. If you want a good deep book on this, look at the book Streams of Wisdom by Dustin DePerna. Ken Wilber has extensive work in this area. Also, if you're skilled enough to handle a really very deep book and you've studied consciousness enough to have the lexicon and the depth of understanding, then one of the best books out there is The Ever-Present Origin by Gene Gebser. This is Gebser's structure stage model. It shows that consciousness began a very, very long time ago with the formation of the earth and biological life, which we call the archaic stage. And again, this stage, the archaic stage, is when we were formative process. So you're talking billions of years ago. So consciousness was at its most rudimentary level. Something has to organize matter. Stones don't turn themselves into metal pots and automobiles. Matter cannot organize itself. There has to be consciousness to move matter. Then with the earth element and the earth phase, we have the archaic. The water phase I correlate to the magic level, and that's when human beings were immersed in biology and their sense of self was very, very low. Humans at that time functioned more like animals in a pack. Their relationship with nature was a fusion. In fact, art from the magic period of human development often did not have mouths on it. So when you find cave paintings and rock carvings, people from this period often painted human beings with no mouth because speaking was not nearly as essential for survival as listening. Many things that you cannot see can eat you in a jungle and come up behind you. And we had to know the sounds of the insects and the sounds of the birds and the sounds of the animals. And some linguists say that what we call language may have emerged from us emulating animal sounds as a means of communicating because it was obvious to us that they could communicate. So here we have a fusion into nature. And this is where your shaman, for example, when asked, how did you come up with the formula for a medicine like ayahuasca? Because researchers have found that I can't remember the exact figures, but it's something like between 50 and 100 billion to 1, the chances of some native just coming across the combination of Peganum harmalina with Chilopanga, chacruna, and the other 4 or so leaves that are mixed together to liberate the DMT and produce the MAO inhibitor enzymes that stop the brain from breaking the DMT down, so you actually have a shamanic experience. Well, what do the shamans say? In every instance, they say the plants taught us, or the trees taught us, depending on where the medicine comes from. So those people have not lost their access to the archaic level of consciousness. We all have this in us, but in a minute I'll tell you what's happened. So the magic level is a fusion with nature, a deep, intimate understanding, a living as though you're a part of nature. You are the brothers and the sisters of the birds, the bees, the animals, the flowers, and the trees. You don't just hunt willy-nilly like white men came and killed off the buffalo, which just shocked the Native Americans to the core because they worshiped these animals. They were family to them. These kinds of things that have happened have been very, very shocking. And then we have the mythic level, which is where we start to be seeing the beginning indications of our separation from nature and the development of what we classically refer to as the ego, or a more enhanced sense of self. And at this level, we start seeing mouths show up because myth means story. The myth is the story that we tell our people to help them understand what's going on in the world, to do our best to explain things like lightning, thunder, earthquakes, and events that could be very, very deadly, but we didn't have the science to truly explain. So myths are often native peoples' or ancient people's attempts to understand the forces of nature. Myths also organize tribal people so that they have a common set of proprietaries and improprietaries. In other words, rights and wrongs. How do you engage with people? Myths told us what to expect from birth to adolescence, to adulthood, to maturation, to old age and death. They described what we could expect so we weren't shocked and so we knew how to prepare. They described nature. They described how life came out of chaos and emerged. So we have a myth of the eternal return, for example, which explains the life-death creation process. So the mythic stage is where we really learned to use words, story, and language to communicate with each other and to organize ourselves into tribes and to know when you should or should not go to war. And ask yourself, what would your life be like without your story? Could you function with no story? Would you know who you were without a story? Would you know who your people are without a story? The difference is, today we have loads of stories. Most of them very severely made up, manufactured, and we have millions and millions and billions of people using digital technology, believing stories as facts because the child in them is so conditioned from our ancestral development to understand that a story, a myth, is a very important means of understanding how you survive not only in the world, but in relationship to each other. So our linkage to story for the immature mind is one in which you have a childlike belief in almost anything you see. Be extremely careful because your minds are being hijacked by people that know how to access the brain centers in you and commandeer your perceptual faculty to get you to believe and to buy almost anything they tell you, all of which is for profit and to control you. And this goes a long ways back. In my studies of brainwashing, I found experts saying how the Catholic Church had mastered brainwashing by the 8th century AD, and they've been perfecting it ever since. And if you think the Catholic Church is good at it, you might want to investigate how good Bill Gates is at it, how good the military is at it, how good the government at it, how good the CIA is at it, how good other agencies like that are at it, and how the scientific establishment is very good at it, and why we have so much so-called science that's destroying the planet. Well, it all boils down to one thing: follow the money, and you end up at just a small number of people. Okay? The mental stage is where we function at now. The mental stage is related to ideas. So once we come up out of the mythic stage, now we start seeing concepts and ideas as real things in and of themselves. So when we look at ideas like space travel, television, radio, the things that make technology, ideas about what you should or shouldn't do with regard to culture. Marketing is one of the most deceptive uses of ideas there is. Religious symbols are using the mental function to program people in certain ways, and it can be done for good or it can be done for not good. The issue with the mental level is that if you actually get too far into it and you lose touch with these previous structure stages, you actually start to worship ideas above and beyond the necessities that keep you alive. The idea that we can cut the rainforest down, the idea that we can poison the planet and make food grow faster, the idea that somehow Mother Nature screwed up and doesn't know how to take care of the soil and farm. the idea that we're smarter than nature, the idea that we can control nature, the idea that Earth is just a bunch of resources that we can do whatever we want with and it shouldn't matter. The idea that all we got to do is go to Mars or to the moon to get away from the mess we've made here, not realizing that only a handful of us can make that journey unless you have billions of dollars and can get a seat on one of Elon Musk's rockets. The idea is so sick because if you look at the amount of money that's being invested, that we could be putting it back into healing the planet. Ideas of religion. One of the most, probably the most common cause of war is ideas based on religion. So whenever we actually get into the mental structure without retaining our understanding of what story, which is a collection of ideas essentially, is for, and why biological life is important, and we should not lose our connection to it, and that the earth is the basis of all of it, then ideas become very problematic, and with the mental structure we move into linear time. Here, in these periods, people did not have a sense of linear time, they had a sense of cyclical time. For example, many of the religions of the world believe in reincarnation, so you live a life and you reincarnate and you evolve progressively. So what looks like a cyclical circle, like a clock, is actually a spiral. We all are familiar with spring, summer, fall, and winter. And the natives and the ancestors all knew that these cycles kept repeating themselves. So we lived much more in an awareness of time as cycles, not as an arrow flying through time. One of the problems with linear time is we have lost the appreciation for the things that we do to each other and to the earth recycle themselves. They keep coming back. So with this idea of linear time, it's like, okay, who cares? I can burn the forest down, I can poison the place. We'll do something in the future to take care of that. But with people that lived in cyclical time, they knew if you ruin the fields, then next spring nothing's going to grow. So the idea of cyclical time is really a lot more oriented towards what really goes on the planet that allows family, tribe, society, and individuals to exist. So we're now breaking through into the integral structure. According to Ken Wilber, only 2% of the world population is at this level. Most people, about 70% of people, are still practicing dogmatic, traditional forms of religion, and that's about 70% of the population, which means about 70% of our population reads stories but can't differentiate they can't draw the metaphor. They can't get the analogy. They take things as facts, and they become very dangerous people that like to kill anybody that doesn't agree with them, which was the nature of a lot of religious wars and still is the nature of a lot of conflict. So we're largely stuck right here, but we have a lot of people that aren't effectively able to use their minds to think constructively, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that our education systems are not designed to teach us how to think, they're designed to teach us what to think. And as Ken Wilber and historians of education have pointed out, our education system as it is used today was built by plantation owners to train slaves not to do anything but what they were told, not to be creative, not to disrupt assembly lines and industrial processes, to be puppets, to be robots, to do exactly what they're told. Sound familiar? Lockdown? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about how many people have advanced degrees but still don't know how to eat, exercise, and take care of themselves, but they can fly spacecraft and airplanes and handle advanced technologies that are destroying the planet, but they still don't realize that these things are the basis of life, and they've got advanced degrees from universities and they can't even determine the difference between good food and shit food and clean water and bad water? That's what happens when you get too trapped up here in the mental realm. And then we also have religious ideas that are very dangerous, that we are fallen, that we're being punished, and that this is just a place where you have to be a good little boy or a good little girl and do what Big Daddy in the sky says so you can get to an imaginary heaven somewhere when you get your reward. Well, that's one of the most profitable ideas in the world. In fact, religion is the most profitable organization or institution, and the Vatican is said to be the richest corporation in the world. And if you really want to learn some depth of the truth of that, look for Freddie Silva's two-part series on the Knights Templars, which I believe you can find on Amazon or on Gaia TV. And he reveals a lot of the truths from inside the church and even shows their own documents talking about it. So when we get to the integral, we're actually in an experience where we begin to see through things. We see through time. We see through each of these structures. In order to evolve yourself and actually evolve, as Ken Wilber and other experts have shown, you must transcend and include. So when you get to the mythic level, you transcended the magic level, you begin to have self-awareness, you begin to pay attention to things that before you were just a victim to and try to understand them, and you try to enhance your survivability by telling stories about how you deal with these things. But if you lose your connection to nature, you're dead. When you get to the mental level, if you don't realize that stories are actually the most primal mechanism of communicating truths to us, each other, and how do we survive together and how do we get along together, then what happens is you start believing things that aren't true as though they are true, and you trust that anybody with a degree or a white jacket is telling you the truth, because we're still under the guise that the chief or the priest knows more than we do, and we don't question it, and our educational system brainwashed into trusting anyone with advanced degrees as authority figures, or anyone wearing a white jacket. That comes right from the priests and their white collars. So if you get to this level and you don't know how to distinguish a true story from a false story, a true story from make-believe. Remember, the word television means tell a vision. Television is one of the most dangerous things when it comes to manipulating the minds of people. So are computer screens, so are phones. Light can carry an almost infinite amount of energy. Just like water has a massive capacity to carry energy, information, so does light. Your telephone is being used, your computer screens are being used, and your televisions are being used to program you with beliefs and behaviors that go below the conscious radar. And the way we're relating to the world and the way we're using chemicals and advanced technologies and being passive about what's going on is proof that you've lost control of your own mind. When I say you, I don't mean any one individual, I mean collectively. Because we have transcended, but we have not included, and modern science has turned the word myth into the functional equivalent of a lie. Why? Because they look at Bible myths and they look at religious myths and they say, wait a minute, the world wasn't created in 6 days, and things like that. Well, they don't understand that these are allegorical teachings. They're stories that make a point indirectly. They're also inspirational teachings to say, hey, by the way, this is what happened in the past to us when we weren't paying attention or didn't know better, right? If you look at the myth of Narcissus, Narcissus didn't really live. There wasn't a man that looked into a pond and fell in love with himself by seeing his reflection in the water. A myth is something that never happened but is happening all the time. So the question I have for you is, how many people do you know that are fixated on the mirror, whose lives become disrupted, whose capacity to have a healthy relationship with others is disrupted because they're so overly oriented toward their aesthetics and become self-centered. Well, the Greeks knew that this was a danger a very, very long time ago. So my point is, a myth isn't something that you evaluate with left brain logic and factual scientific investigations, because science is based on quantitative assessment. Myth is based on qualitative reality. Love is a quality that we experience. I don't care how right science is objectively, but if you ignore that love is what holds it all together, then you're acting like a scientist who's only got one half to their brain, and that's killing the planet and ruining the self. So, at the integral level, to be an integral person, you have to understand the earth as the basis. You have to understand our connection to nature. You have to understand the importance of story and what a story really is and how story should be used to enhance survivability. You have to learn how to use ideas to enhance your quality of life without destroying the planet and each other. And when you get here, you can actually see through it all. You understand cyclical time. You understand the pros and cons of linear time. You understand each of these functions and you incorporate them into you, so you protect the earth, you stay connected to nature, you understand the use of stories, and you use stories effectively, but not to deceive, manipulate, lie, steal, and cheat from people. Pay attention, boys and girls, to the last year of your life. And when you get here, you can see how it all fits together, and you know what tools to use, what approaches to take to get the best outcome, to keep yourself alive, to keep your family alive, to keep your tribe alive, to keep society thriving, and to keep culture culturing. What's happening right now? Look around. Pay very close attention. Read the books I've mentioned. But you don't need to read the books if you just look around. Look at your body. Is your body healthy? Well, how is it that we have all these nutritionists and all these doctors and all these scientists and all these therapists? We've got more doctors, scientists, nutritionists, dietitians, and therapists and gyms per capita than ever in the history of man, and we're the sickest, most obese, most unhealthy people in the world, all backed by science. That should concern you. What happens when you have science with no morals? What happens when science is used to railroad your mind into believing in things that aren't true? This happens. What happens when government uses science to manipulate people? What happens when rich people use money to manipulate government? This happens. What happens when rich people use religion and government to manipulate people? This happens. What happens when marketers use science, religion, and government and media to manipulate people? This happens. What happens when large corporations start mining your personal data and tracking your every move so that they can convince you that you need things that you can't afford? This happens. Research shows that 98% of the US population is 2 paychecks from bankruptcy. Look at what happened when COVID hit and people did not have the reserves to weather the storm. Many of them are living in tents right now. We all need to wake up and smell the coffee. We need to pay close attention to what's going on. Science is not scientific in many instances. Education is no longer education in many instances. If science is scientific, science is the pursuit of the truth that delivers the truth. To the scientists that are out there delivering truth, I bow to you and I thank you. To those of you that are on the paychecks of corporations telling lies in the name of science, wake up, because you fit into this model and you too will suffer the perils unless you can get on Elon Musk's rocket. And if you want to live on Mars, then all the frickin' more power to you. Good luck. Okay? So this is what the self is. That's what the self is. That's what the self is. And we scientists say the alchemists were not very intelligent. They didn't know what we're talking about. They say myth is a bunch of bullshit. I got news for you. We were doing a hell of a lot better at maintaining our health and vitality when we were going around in horses than when we were shooting rockets into space, hitting each other with nuclear weapons, and tricking each other with slick marketing ploys and using advanced technology that should be illegal to coerce people's minds and emotions and trigger them to live in ways that are immoral and unethical and cause them to fight with and destroy each other so rich people can buy up the resources for pennies on the dollar and then sell it back to you at a high profit. The first economist was known as Adam Smith. If you study the biography of Adam Smith, one of the things he warned was whenever corporations or big business gets involved in government, you're in big trouble. He said in all of his years working in the field of economy, he never had a single business where politics and big businessmen got together where the topic of discussion was not how to trick people into getting more money out of them with no concern for the impact it had on their lives. Be very careful when religion gets involved in government. Look how many times presidents of the United States have used words that were religious. Look how much time they spend lobbying religions to get their vote, but then don't deliver on their promises. These are things that we all have to wake up to because we are losing ourself. And when you lose the world, and you lose culture, and you lose society, and you lose tribe, and you lose family, you can't survive. You got nothing. You die. And we're all dying very slowly. Look at the statistics on disease. Look at what I just told you about children being born with 120 to 200 dangerous chemicals in their bloodstream out of the womb. Look at what doctors want to do with children in the first 3 years of their life. In the name of science. Have you read the packages? Have you read the warnings? Most people don't. This is dangerous. I've been on this planet 60 years. And I've watched a lot of shit go down. But I've never seen so much lying, so much manipulation, so much cheating, and so much injustice, and so much trickery in my entire life. And I've never seen so many educated people be so absolutely ridiculously foolish. And I've never seen people be so gullible in my life to believe anything that comes across the television screen as though it was a fact and not use both halves of their brain and do constructive thinking. We're at a beautiful time because chaos is with us. And whenever a system's in a state of chaos, it becomes unstable. It's easy to change it. The question is, how bad do we need it to get before we hold hands together, circle the globe, and say, that's enough of your bullshit. We're not going to do it anymore. We want real medical help. We want honest religion. We want real politics that's for the people, by the people, that's democratic and is for freedom. We don't want fascism. We don't want scientocracy. We don't want corporatocracy. Do you? I know something about these things. I was a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division. I got out of the military when I found out what was really going on there. I couldn't be told to go kill people when I found out it was to steal their resources and it was just a bunch of rich people pulling the strings. There is enough documentaries and enough books about all this that anybody that wants to know the truth can easily find it out. The same tools that are being used against you, you can use to save your life and we can use to save each other. Noam Chomsky warned us about this over and over and over again. Search Noam Chomsky. See what he has to say about it, all this stuff. When people are too busy eating McDonald's, drinking soda pop, and watching shit television, they don't actually pay attention to what's going on, and that's why it's being done and made available to you. There's an old saying that you should all remember very carefully. Never trust a man whose television screen is bigger than his bookshelf, because it means he's been brainwashed and he's not educated, or she. Pay close attention. You're all in deep shit right now. And I'm in it with you. But I've made damn sure that I take care of my children and feed them real food and get clean water. I do whatever I have to do. I'll be 60 years old this summer and I'm still fit and I'm still strong and I'm still fast and I can still think. Most men my age look like hell has warmed over because they don't know how to live. They've lost their self. They've trusted the mental without referring to and including the mythic and the magic and the archaic. That's what I came to share with you today. Sorry for getting so passionate, but this is very important. It's hard for me to watch babies being born sick, children being miseducated, our education system being used to railroad children's minds and young adults' minds. It's hard for me to watch rich people commandeer your minds and your money. It's hard for me to see the political system being so seriously corrupt. It's hard for me to see the military being used unethically and immorally. It's hard for me to watch science being degraded down to corporate for-hire manipulation and trickery. And as Ervin Laszlo, one of the greatest scientists and thinkers in the world, said on my podcast when I interviewed him, he said, "Paul, those aren't scientists. No scientist would do that. They're technicians that are hired by corporations masquerading as scientists." That was a very good point. We have to very carefully discern the difference between a technician and a scientist, and remember the rule, follow the money. We also have to be damn concerned about all the censorship that's going on. The censorship kills diversity. When you kill diversity in nature, you kill nature. Diversity equals stability. When you start censoring the truth, or even if it's not true, when you start censoring freedom of speech, you lose individuality, you lose freedom, you lose free will, and you become something ugly that has no room for anybody that doesn't fit some little cookie cutter idea. When you start censoring people, you lose your warning sign. When crazy people start threatening to do things in the media, we know to watch them. But when you start censoring them, people show up with guns at shopping malls and movie theaters and football games and post offices, and we lose our warning signal. I say these things because I care. Behind that camera is 4,000 books and hundreds of DVDs and university programs. And I spent my entire life studying all of the things that have to do with health, science, psychology, physiology, earth sciences, because I'm a therapist and it's my job to help people live better and love better. And it makes me sick to my stomach what's being done in the name of science, in the name of academic education, and what it's doing to you. So, let's all hold hands together and let's get clear on what we need before we lose ourselves and destroy in just a couple of hundred years what it took 4.9 billion years for Mother Nature to give us as a gift. Thanks for joining me today. If you haven't listened to my podcast, Living 4D with Paul CHEK, I have a lot of excellent interviews with some of the greatest scientists and thinkers in the world. And it's my pleasure and my honor to provide you with some real education and some out-of-the-box thinking. And as Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. And right now, we need to get out of the box. We need to get back to loving and caring for each other and realizing that what we need most, everybody needs. We all need the earth. We all need a healthy nature. We all need clean water. We all need clean air. And if we were smart, we would immediately task military services worldwide with reforestation, using military advanced technologies to clean the water, clean the soils up, and we need to make it illegal to do anything that diminishes life on this planet or for nature. And if you haven't read Edward O. Wilson, his book, The Future of Life, it makes it very, very clear that we're on thin, thin ice He's a man with over 100 scientific awards behind his name and a highly respected man. Thanks for joining me today. Lots of love. Look forward to sharing with you as often as I can, and I'll see you soon.